Welcome to Day 70 on the Trail. We have 3 readings for today, from Acts 17 verses 16 through chapter 18 verse 17, Leviticus 4 verse 1 through chapter 5 verse 13, and Proverbs chapter 8. In Acts 17, after Paul is driven out of Berea, he makes his way to Athens, beginning in verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So Paul is waiting for Silas and Timothy. But notice how he spends his time waiting. He is not passive. He is paying attention. He looks around and sees a people in search of God. And Paul knew something, or rather someone, who could help them. In verse 17, so he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They call Paul a babbler, literally a seed picker. They think he is someone like a wandering philosopher who, like a bird picking up seeds, collects philosophical terms here and there and uses them in their speeches, but have no idea what they mean. However, they are willing to listen to what he has to say and maybe even learn from him. So they take him to the Areopagus, also called Mars Hill, which is located just below the Acropolis. In earlier times, the Areopagus was a court that performed the functions of the Senate. However, despite its reduction in power and influence, they still dealt with homicide, morality, and philosophical discussions at the Areopagus. And it is here that Paul delivers a message that gives us some insight into how he shared the message of Jesus with the Gentiles. Verse 22. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went throughout the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." Where does Paul start? He does not start with, "Let me show you how wrong you are." Instead, Paul's approach demonstrates humility. He looked carefully at their objects of worship. In a sense, Paul took the time to get to know them. He recognized that they were seeking God as well, and he honors that search. In fact, it is quite striking that a Jewish Pharisee would point to a foreign altar and start with its inscription, "To an unknown God." Paul begins by finding common ground. And then he continues this connection to God and eventually the resurrection. Verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of the heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor, he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of their places where they would live, so that they would search for God, and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. Now, there are several important truths that Paul outlines here. God, as the Creator, is greater than us, or anything we can construct for him. In fact, God does not need us. However, despite our relative insignificance, God cares about us. Also, God does not stand aloof from his creation. He wants to be found by us. Now, to help them make this connection to these common truths, Paul quotes two of their philosophers and poets, Epimenides from the 6th century BC and Aratus from the 3rd century BC. They also claim that we are given life by God and we will find life in God. So why does Paul do this? He wants to connect with them, to begin in a place of understanding with them. Then Paul begins to explain the part of the story that is unknown to them. Verse 30. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." At that point, Paul left them. So what is missing from Paul's message? Well, there's no clear mention of Jesus in particular, only the resurrection. Why? Well, there's one point, it seems, that Paul wants to emphasize in this first interaction. There is true justice and righteousness to be found, and God alone defines it. And not only that, God is involved in the world in a real way, a tangible and powerful way. This is not a matter of theory or philosophical debate. And to prove it, God raises this righteous man from the dead. In the end, the resurrection of Jesus makes all the difference in the world. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.